Hey, this is Bunny, and today we are going to paint some vines. And yes, I do need vines for a coming up campaign. I have a bunch in different colors, and I need some more. So I found these two in a set I was assembling. So I primed them, and I'm getting ready to use them in a campaign. So what I typically do with vines is I like to paint them in the inverse of each other. I like to paint them in pairs, and I like to paint them so they are the opposites of each other. So for example, the last set of vines I painted, ooh, these little thorny things are sharp and annoying, but the last set of vines I painted one red with black thorns and one black with red thorns. So that was fun and cool. So this time, as we are approaching the Halloween season, I figured maybe I would paint one green and one base purple. Now I'm not going to use an overly dark color. There's a little bit of dog hair here. I have dogs. I actually have a lot of dogs. You'd be surprised at how many dogs I have. I have big dogs. I have big, hairy, sheddy dogs. So sometimes when they're shedding, their hair gets everywhere. They're big. Like, the biggest is like 170 pounds. And he's very hairy. So, yeah. Dog hair happens, man. Get used to it. Anyway. I thought with Halloween coming up, we would hit these vines with some Halloween type colors. And I am using fairly light colors. I kind of debated how much white and black and gray to add to my colors when I was mixing them. And I decided to go fairly light because while thorns are typically darker than this, I am going to be using a dark sepia or a dark umber. Probably an umber because that's what I have mixed, but I might end up using sepia. But either way, it's going to be a really dark wash. So if I start with a really dark color, they might end up darker than I'm really comfortable with, right? So I'm going to start with these lighter colors. Just these lighter purples, lighter greens, just because I don't want to end up darker than I actually want, because that's happened before to me and to lots of people. You end up painting, you're like, I like this color, and then you go to add a wash. That's dog hair. But you go to add a wash, and that wash is way darker than you thought it would be. Like way darker than you thought it would be, and that's not necessarily a good thing because you didn't want it that dark. So I've learned if I'm going to use a wash, to use that wash on lighter colors. So if you want a darker color and you want it to sparkle, you might, for example, use a silver wash, which is really fun to give it like a magical look kind of thing. So we'll see. We are going to let these dry, obviously, and see what else we might want to do to it. So I am going to paint them the inverse of each other. One green with purple thorns, one purple with green thorns. It'll be fun. And I do like having them in pairs. I don't like all my thorns to look the same. Like, I don't like that when that's the look you have. And I know there's something to be said for consistency, for things looking all the same. I know. I just don't like it. I like my campaigns to have some color. So that's what I typically do. Okay, here we go. Now we're just going to let that dry so we can paint the other side. That is the thing with painting these pieces, is you have to wait for the one side to dry. Because if I handle them now, I'm just going to muck it up. So we'll be right back. For me, it'll be a few hours. For you, just a few seconds. All right, that's nice and dry. it's really important that you wait and make sure everything is really dry, because I'm handling this now on the other end. It basically would destroy the paint job. So definitely make sure everything is really dry before you move on. That's one of the mistakes I see people make a lot, is they're not making sure everything is dry. And if you don't make sure everything is dry, you're gonna screw it up. You're gonna wreck what you've already done. So don't do that. Now, I did see a couple of spots that I had missed. There we go. Definitely want to make sure we don't miss them. We don't want missing spots. It doesn't help anybody. Okay. Lots of paint on here. I'm doing a fairly thick coat just because I can. I can do a thick coat, so I'm gonna do a thick coat. Just because I want to. I want to do a good thick coat. I'm not worried about it drying or anything like that. It'll dry in time. I have time. I'm not in a big rush, so I don't need to hurry, because I've got all week before I need these, and frankly they'll be done well before that. I'm literally not doing a ton of different colors. I'm doing I don't have a ton of plans. Okay, when I sit down and paint, I often don't have a ton of planning done, but I think I'm going to do the green, the purple, a little bit of white on the thorns, just like a thin line of white on each of the thorns. And I think that's probably it. Then I'll hit it with the wash, and then we'll be good. So, yeah, I think we have to let that dry, and then we'll start doing the opposite colors. That'll be fun. I do like when you start hitting it with a second color, then it really starts to come to life. Okay, we're going to ignore the barking dog, and we're just going to start hitting these little thorns with their alternate color. And yes, somebody is here, but it's not somebody for me, so I don't have to go to the door. They're just really excited. They're really excited doggies. So we're just going to carefully use a small brush if you're doing like thorns. But I don't get too picky when it comes to thorns, to be honest. Because you're not really going to be looking at the thorns. Let's be honest about that. Flip that over so we can do this side. Get these guys on the inside again. And this is just one of those finicky things. Just because you want to hit the thorns and you don't want to hit all the other spots. So, it's just one of those things. Just one of those things. And I'm not going to get too persnickety when it comes to the thorns. I'm just not. Like, can you get really, oh no, I overpainted? Yeah. I'm not going to worry about it too much, mostly because they're thorns. Like, are you really going to see that much of them? They're not really that important. I mean, it's important. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying you're plopping a little color where the thorny bits stick out. If you miss a spot or you overpaint in a spot, it's really not the end of the world. So you just kind of find the spots where it's kind of rare and paint them, right? Literally just don't worry about it more than you need to. Because ultimately, how often are you going to be looking at the thorns? question I always ask is, how often am I going to use this piece? Is it going to be all the time? Then maybe I want to pay a little more attention. Maybe I want to pay a little more attention to that if I'm going to use it all the time. Am I not going to use it all the time? Then maybe I'm not going to worry about it. Like, I like painting the pieces I'm going to use, even if I'm hardly going to use them. Switch over to our green. Even if I'm hardly going to use them, I still like to do it, right? I'm just gonna... This guy has some bigger thorns, so even if I'm hardly going to use them, I still want to do some basic painting. But how much you paint them, really for me, is determined by how much I'm going to use them. Because seriously, if you're not going to use it that often, and frankly, so I have a bunch of sets of thorns now in different coordinated colors, like I talked about earlier. I don't use them that much. For a few minutes here and there in campaigns, right? But how often are just plain thorns in a campaign for longer than a few minutes? Not long, at least not in the campaigns we play. Now, if you do a lot of campaigns where you're going to use thorns a lot of the time, then yeah, you might want to consider doing more than I'm doing. You might want to consider it, but literally think about how often you're going to use the piece first, because it doesn't matter that much. If you're not going to use that piece, then it really won't make a difference. You won't notice, right? So I spend more time on like characters and dragons and even my stupid little goblins and kobolds, because as much as I don't really like kobolds, how often do you use them? All the time, right? Literally all the time. I don't like painting them. I think they're ugly, but you know what? They are part of a lot of campaigns, so it makes sense. It makes sense to use them and to paint them nicely because you're going to use them all the time. I'm not really going to use these all the time, so I'm still doing it, right? I'm still painting it. I'm still going over it. I'm still making sure, right? I'm making sure that all my little thorns are painted, at least sort of. But if I accidentally get some green in between the thorns, I'm not going to fuss. Only fuss if it's going to bother you. Like, if it's going to annoy the heck out of you, let's say I accidentally and did a bunch of green between those two thorns. Is it going to bother you? Right? Because sometimes the answer is legitimately no. Sometimes the answer is, I never really use these pieces. We kind of only pull them out when we have to anyway. We've used them twice in a year. I don't really care. And if that's the case, just don't worry about it. Right? Just don't worry about it. Because it won't matter long term. Okay, a couple more thorns on here, and then I have to set them aside to dry. Okay. A couple of these guys in here, so I don't have to do it later. That guy. That guy. We're not going to go up there because we won't have anywhere to hold it, but we are just going to get this base. Okay. We're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back. Because there's no sense in fussing. They're just thorns. We don't have to worry about it. They're literally just thorns. All right, let's get some more of these spikes done. Decided maybe I won't do the white. Maybe I'll just leave it. I mean, it doesn't really need white highlighting. Again, this is not going to be used all that much. I mean, I'd like to find ways to use my thorns more, but I have thorns in different colors. Like I said, I like to do the inverse. I have thorns in so many different colors, and I don't really use them very often. I like having them because every once in a while you need a whole bunch for a campaign. But gonna be honest, I don't really use them more than that. Right? I mean, I'd like to, but thorns are such a specific thing that I just don't see where I would use them that often, because they are so specific. I mean, you think about it, and not all forests will have thorns like this, right? It's usually specific and relating to certain types of quests that your characters are on or things like that. It's not typically something you just have. At least not for me. It's not that I don't like thorns. I do. It's just for me, they're kind of a really specific thing. So I don't know. I just don't use them that much. Except I do have a campaign coming up where I need like all the thorns I've got. Right? So that's a little bit different. Okay, I'm just touching up a couple of those. What I kind of like to do when I'm painting thorns sometimes is you can get a glob of paint on your end of your brush. You can like dip the thorn in the glob of paint. Sometimes you drop your glob. But if you can do that, then basically like the thorn penetrates that glob. I need a bigger glob because I'm losing my glob. I'm losing my glob because I'm losing my paint. But essentially you can kind of dip your thorn in that glob. But eventually your glob goes away because you use it up. So eventually you have to get a new glob. But it's kind of fun, and yes, it splits your brush, but that's why I'm using a junk brush. I always use a junk brush to paint thorns because it just makes sense to do that, right? It just makes sense to use a garbage brush that I don't need to paint my thorns, because some techniques with painting almost require you to wreck your brush. So don't be afraid to keep a brush that's all, like you can see this brush is all split and everything. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, it doesn't matter. Because I keep the brush. It's not that it's garbage after, it's that it's specifically for stuff like this that is going to split your brush. Right? Like this is totally going to split your brush if you paint it this way. You don't have to paint it this way. Obviously, people get their own techniques, but I find this works pretty well. But yeah, it splits your brush. So then what you end up doing is saving the brush for the next time you're gonna paint something like this. Or the next time you're doing something where you're totally gonna split your brush. Because, I mean, that happens. Okay, I think I'm literally... There's a couple deep inside there that I want to get. A couple deep inside. This one here. Those two. Get my brush between them. I can hit them both at the same time. That one. This one. Okay, that looks alright. Again, I'm not too concerned. These are going to be backdrop for one part of one campaign. I'm not that worried. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. Then we're going to come back and do our sepia wash. Or an umber. Probably an umber. You know what? I'll use whatever wash I have already prepared so I don't have to mix a new one. I'm kind of having a lazy day today. I decided to skip the white. We're just going to move straight on to our wash. I'm going to apply the wash pretty thick because I do want it, like I want a lot. I might even do a second coat. Depends how this sets. Probably not. Normally I work... Did I have enough sand? Yeah, I did. So I add sand to my washes sometimes. You see how there's some grit? I like the grit. So I add a very fine sand to some of my washes. Not all of them. Just some of my washes where I want them to definitely stand out. So you'll see this has just a little bit of grit to it. Not a ton. Just a little bit, just to give it some texture. Okay. Let's get this in. This one I have to hold still because this one has like tendrils and stuff that poke out more, whereas that one lays flatter, so this one will just keep rocking. Okay. Just keep doing this. And a wash is just a really thinned down paint. For anyone curious what a wash is, a wash is just an incredibly thinned down paint. So that's all I'm doing. This is just an umber color that I have really thinned down. So what you do is you start with the water and add paint to it, and then keep adding paint until you're happy with the consistency of the wash. And some people like to use a thicker wash or a thinner wash. Sometimes you'll vary the thickness of your wash depending on your usage. There we go. And then I'm going to do 3 coats of wash, only because I'm going to do this side, I'm going to flip it over to the other side, and then I'm going to apply more to the base because I want more boogers laying at the base. So we're going to let that dry. Then we'll come back and worry about it then. Okay, let's turn these guys over. They're nice and dry. And do the other side. We're just literally globbing it on. I'm not too particular about the way I apply washes. Some people are. But it just brings out the definition. Most of the time you should use a wash. Not all of the time. Every once in a while I'll be like, eh. But most of the time, unless you want to use some really advanced highlighting techniques, this is the best way to do that. Because I don't want to get crazy. I don't want to get crazy. These are just vines. They don't need to be all insane. They're literally just vines. Like, you don't need to go crazy for vines. Right? We're just darkening them up. That's why we use such light colors. Always remember that when you do a dark wash and you're covering the entire thing, they will get darker. So bear that in mind when you're picking your colors, right? Okay. We will have one more thing. I just want to stand them up, basically darken the bases with more wash. And I'm going to stand them up to do that. For right now, we're going to let this dry. And we'll come back and see how we're liking the look. Okay, let's turn these guys right side up. And we're going to add a bunch of wash. We're going to add a bunch of wash to the base, just to darken the base up a little more. I mean, we'll touch up some of the other spots. I splashed quite a bit there. But for the most part, it's the bases I'm after. Right? It's the bases I want to hit. Just because I want the bases a little darker. Not a ton darker. Just, you know, a little bit darker. Okay. And then we're gonna let that sit. We'll come back, see how they look. I think that's all I'm gonna do. I don't think I'm gonna do any dry brushing or anything like that. I think I'm gonna leave them flat like that. Again, they're background scenery. I don't want them to stand out. All right, they are dry. And I like the way they turned out. Remember, the point of painting them yourself is that you enjoy the way they turned out. And I think these will fit right in with my already existing pieces that I'm going to be using in that campaign. Anyway, that is that. They are done. Now, paint things the way you want them to look. And remember, don't spend too much time on background pieces. They're not that important. I hope you'll be back with us next time. Bye!